Hey, I'm Eric, and I'm going to present on behalf of the team our work on MM-Spatial, exploring 3D spatial understanding in multimodal LLMs. So why do we care about 3D spatial understanding? Well, 3D understanding is an important capability for many applications, including in AR, VR, and also robotics. However, multimodal LLMs, while they excel at 2D understanding, for example, differentiating left versus right, or doing 2D grounding, so predicting bounding boxes in 2D space, they still lack in terms of 3D understanding. For example, reasoning about depth or distances between objects in 3D space. And as one example, there was an earlier study in the Cambrian 1 paper where they introduced this benchmark called CV-Bench. And on this benchmark, which focuses on spatial understanding, including also 3D understanding, as you can see here in these two tasks. For example, you have on the left-hand side the depth ordering task, where you need to tell which object is closer to the camera, object A or object B. And also the relative distance task on the right-hand side here, where the question is, given a reference object in 3D, you need to decide which object is closer to the reference object, object A or object B. And on this benchmark, I mean, this is kind of a simple 3D task in some sense, because it's just about relative distances between objects or between objects and the camera. But even on this task, actually state-of-the-art models struggle quite a bit. As you can see here, the upper bound of 100% is not reached by a 20% margin. So the Cambrian 1 34B model is quite far away from this. And this is kind of one main motivation for our work here, is to improve these capabilities. Now, what do we contribute? So we contribute on one hand a data set called CA-VQA, Cubify Anything VQA, which comes both with multiple input signals. So we provide RGB images, we provide different types of metric depth maps, including sensor-based depth and also monocular estimated depth, and also multi-view frames, so essentially like a video stream that covers indoor scenes in this case. Then we also cover different spatial understanding tasks, including relative spatial relationships. For example, is object A behind object B, similar to what you saw before for CV-Bench, but then also more complex tasks such as metric object distance and size estimation. For example, how far away is the sofa? Then the answer is 1.2 meters in metric units. And then ultimately also 3D bounding box prediction, so estimating the 3D box of a certain object in 3D space. Then based on this data set, we train a model called MM-Spatial, which is a generalist multimodal LLM, so it can also solve other tasks. It's not just specialized for spatial understanding. And it's just a very standard architecture, so you have an image encoder that encodes the images. You have a question that you can also take in, and then the decoder LLM will then be able to produce a response. And in this case, we also support chain of thought reasoning in the sense that the model can, for example, for this question, what's the distance between the box and the TV? The model can first reason about the individual objects. For example, it can do 2D grounding to identify the box and to identify the TV. Then it can also do depth prediction to find the depth of both objects. And then finally, it can kind of conclude the answer, which in this case is 1.81 meters. Optionally, we also allow the use of a tool that can query a depth map. So if a depth map is available, then we can also use depth information from that depth map. But otherwise, the model can also just predict depth itself. Just to flash some results here. For the details, you can look into the paper. So we achieve state-of-the-art performance on spatial understanding tasks, including spatial RGPT bench, CA-VQA, which is our own benchmark, and then also CV-Bench is the one we saw in the beginning. Additionally, we also show that our model can do pretty good at depth estimation compared to Depth Pro, which is like a strong monocular depth estimator. On this particular task on our CA-VQA benchmark, we can actually achieve an improvement over Depth Pro, even though our model is a generalist multimodal LLM and not just optimized for depth estimation. Finally, I want to show a quick qualitative example to illustrate what our model can do compared to other models. For example, in this case, this is an image from our benchmark, which is quite difficult combined with a question. So the question is, what's the distance between the frame and the television? So you first, as a human, need to identify where's the frame, where's the television. And then you will figure out that they're actually, kind of in the corner and they're not fully visible. So it's even difficult to identify the objects of interest first. And then, if you know the objects, then you might estimate what the answer is. In this case, it's 6.1 meters, but as a human, you can tell that's quite difficult, actually. And if we ask state-of-the-art models, including Frontier, commercial models and also open source models, they can actually not solve the task. So they will say something like 1 or 2 meters, which is far off. Whereas our model, even the vanilla MM-Spatial 3B model that does no reasoning at all, so it just predicts the final answer, it can actually get pretty close. But then if we add reasoning on top, which means we first identify the 2D bounding boxes of the two objects, of the frame and of the television, then also we do the depth prediction for each of the two objects, we can actually get quite accurate response. And then finally, if we can also leverage a tool, so if we have a depth map available and we can leverage the tool, the depth estimates get even more accurate because they're now based on the ground truth depth map, for example. And then finally, the reasoning response will also be more accurate here. And with that, yeah, thanks for your attention, and please see us at the poster or drop any questions. Thanks.